Good morning and welcome to the Gear Room Underground. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about wet, dry signal paths. So, ever since I was a kid, when I was playing, when I was, 14, 16, I've always been into stereo rigs. And back then it was completely haphazard. I had something that plugged into my Stratocaster, and then that had two different outlets. So then I would plug two different cords into that, right? That was hanging out of my Strat, and then one of those cords would go through a series of effects to one amp. I think my Fender Deluxe Reverb, and then the other cord would go through a series of pedals to my other amp, which I think was probably a PV Classic. Or there might have been some different amps, but those are my two amps that I had as a kid. And so I knew nothing about them, out of phase or anything. I was just trying to, move those two amps as far apart as I possibly could in my garage where our band practiced or anytime we'd go play. So my goal was to try to get like stereo sound, and I wanted to mimic what I was hearing on Jimi Hendrix albums. And of course I didn't realize all that was done in the studio, not live. And I didn't have stereo pedals back then, or pedals with dual, stereo outputs. So really it was two different chords coming out of my guitar, going into two totally separate signal chains, into two separate amps. But I loved it. I'd have different delays on different amps. And anyway, I've always loved stereo setups. But you find when you play live that stereo really is a waste, because people in the audience can't hear the stereo unless they're sitting in a certain place. And also in a band mix, it gets lost. So the next option is doing a wet-dry mix, which is a great option because one amp, the dry amp, has, and in this case the dry amp is the Mark 525. The dry amp has just your overdrive sounds coming out of it. And then the wet amp, and in this case, I'm using both, either the Suhr Badger or the Swart Mark II. Right now it's on the Suhr, but a minute ago it was on the Swart. That wet amp has your delays and your reverbs. So instead of one amp having the overdrive sounds and the delays and the reverbs, which can get really muddy, even if you're using the effects loop, having one amp as the overdrive sound and the second amp as the wet sound for the reverbs and delays and so forth is just this beautiful combination. It gives you a really big full sound, but also the overdriven sound can cut through the mix because it's sharp and clean and pristine, and well, as pristine as an overdriven sound can be. But then the wet amp has all the delays coming out of it and the reverbs, so you get the full effect, but without muddying up your sound. So let me explain a little bit how I did this, and then I'll play it for a minute. So what I did, and it's actually really simple. So the way the signal chain is going now is that the Line 6 G50 wireless, one output is going into the white tuner that you can see. Sorry, I've got my guitar around my neck. It's hard to move. So the white poly tuner. And then the other output is going, at least right now, into this Phase 90 script, which is then going into the Cali 76 compressor, which is then going into the Analog Man King of Tone, which is then going into the tube driver. And, oh wait, sorry, hang on, let me take this guitar off, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Actually, it's something so we're going into the Phase 90, into the Cali 76 compressor, into the King of Tone, into the tube driver, but now something interesting happens. The tube driver is going into this full tone TruePath ABY box, and that's going into channel A. And then out of channel A, I'm going into the Mesa Boogie Mark 525, right? So all those overdrive pedals are going into this head, right into the front of the head, and playing out of those two cabinets. But let's return here. But then the signal path continues, and channel B, which is the one that has the ground lift and the phase shift adjustment, is going into the Analog Man ADRX 20 analog delay, which is controlled by this Amazio. And then from there, it's going into the Flint Strymon, which is, of course, reverb and tremolo. And from there, it's going into either the Swart Mark II or the Sir Badger. So what's happening is that the phaser, the compressor, the King of Tone, and the tube driver are all going from channel A into Mark 525. That splits the signal right there. But channel B is going into the ADRX 20 delay and the Flint, and that's going into the second amp. But the delay pedals are still, the overdrive pedals are still going through that channel too. So the wet amp is still getting the overdrive pedals, but both of the wet amps are set really clean. So they're getting the overdrive pedals plus the delay and the reverb, and the Boogie is just getting the drive. Okay, so now that we've explained it, let's set it up for a second so you can hear it. Sorry, we'll have to give you the view of the backyard for a second while I pick this up. So here's the sound. Let's go with that's the wet signal. Now, that's the dry signal. Now here is the wet signal. So that was the signal with the overdrives. Here's the signal with the delays. That's wet. Here comes dry. Dry, wet. Now both of them. Now, just for fun, I switched it into the Swart. yeah, that's it. There you have it. The wet dry rig setup. So try that at home, and it is an amazing setup. Okay, have a absolutely wonderful day. Peace out, Cabbage Patch.